So my name's Rick Kahlenberg. I'm a senior fellow at the Century Foundation. I've been to a lot of these progressive conferences, and when they go on for 9 or 10 hours, there's a Darwinian process that takes place. So I want to say that you are the special folks, the survivors. You know, and Ralph Nader, who used to be a hero of mine, used to give these 4-hour speeches, and people would stream out of the audience after a while, but he didn't care because those people at the end were the ones who mattered most. So let's hope that's the case today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a new book that I wrote with Moshe Marvit called Why Labor Organizing Should Be a Civil Right. We had some copies available. I think some of you may have picked up those, and also there's a New York Times op-ed that summarizes our argument. I think it comes down to this. You all may remember in President Obama's second inaugural address, he had that famous line about the success in Selma, Seneca Falls, and Stonewall, right? So we're talking about the great civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, and the gay rights movement. So who was missing, right? Organized labor. Now maybe that's because there just wasn't an S that you could associate with organized labor, but I think it goes to something deeper, which is that labor has resisted the association with individual rights that resonate so powerfully with Americans in this country, whether we like it or not. I mean, I'm all for solidarity and for collective action. That's why I'm here today. But I think that we all should consider whether putting individual rights at the center of our efforts to strengthen labor and to address inequality might be a better option than the traditional ones we've been pursuing. So I want to make 3 sets of observations. The first 2 will be very quick because basically they've been made by other people throughout the day. The first is that I think we all here agree that labor is in deep trouble. And that new approaches are needed. The National Labor Relations Act is not protecting workers who want to try to organize, which helps explain labor's decline. Yes, globalization has a lot to do with the decline in labor, but we all know that in other countries, as Elizabeth Bunn noted, in other countries there are higher levels of union density, even though those countries are facing the same globalization pressures, in part because they have better legal protections for workers who are trying to organize. The single most effective way to stop a labor organizing effort in its tracks is to fire some workers and scare the rest of them. And Freedom House says that U.S. labor is less free than 41 other nations, in part because the remedies for violating the NLRA, which does technically prohibit firing workers, are so weak. Back pay and reinstatement. It's been noted several times today that traditional labor law reform doesn't seem to have a lot of resonance in this country. So the 4 times when all the stars were aligned, a Democratic president, Democratic House, Democratic Senate, efforts going back to Lyndon Johnson at labor law reform have failed. So we need a new paradigm in addressing this issue. Second point is that the exciting alternatives to traditional labor unions that have been talked about today should supplement rather than supplant traditional labor organizing. And I think that's something that the folks who talked about the alternatives would also generally agree with, that in addition to raising the minimum wage, passing domestic worker bills of rights, in addition to the great efforts of Working America, we also need strong labor unions. And that was a point that was made on several occasions, that we need self-sustaining financial models because all those other organizations, all those alternative organizations rely on foundations or on the labor movement itself. Okay, so third and last observation is, if unions are necessary on the one hand, and if traditional labor law reform is unlikely to be successful on the other, what is to be done? And Moshe Marvin and I argue that we should try to recapture the language of individual rights on behalf of labor, which isn't something that's normally done. We get killed politically when we talk only about collective action and solidarity. Americans believe profoundly in individual rights. That's why the deceptive rhetoric around right to work is so powerful and resonant. Obviously, groups on the left have used this very effectively in the last 50 years with the civil rights movement, the women's movement, and the gay rights movement. And so what Moshe and I argue, following the lead of labor lawyer Tom Gagan, is that we should amend the Civil Rights Act, which now protects people from being discriminated against based on race and sex and national origin, religion, and other categories, and extend that to people trying to organize a union. And I think that does three things. The first is the Civil Rights Act has powerful remedies for violations. When an individual is discriminated against based on race or sex, they are eligible for compensatory and punitive damages, which is not something that's available under the National Labor Relations Act. Importantly, they also get a day in court, a day in federal court, which means the right to engage in legal discovery. So you can depose the boss, which is a powerful legal tool that some employers would like to avoid and will settle as a result. Secondly, the language of civil rights are something that people can understand. They understand that you should have a right not to be fired for organizing and trying to become a member of the middle class. That's pretty simple. Now, I support EFCA, but it is not simple, and you get distracted in all sorts of conversations about the secret ballot and whatnot. And so having a very clean message that civil rights, which have been so good for this country, should be expanded to anyone trying to organize a labor union, I think is something that people will understand and will be politically popular. The third reason to want to do this is hopefully to change the culture in this country, because it used to be perfectly fine to discriminate based on race. That was something that was considered acceptable in our society. And through changes in attitudes, but also through changes in law, we changed the culture. And I think that would be very important. If it became shameful for an employer to discriminate against someone trying to organize a union because you have violated that individual's civil rights, I think that could be powerful. So if you look at the trajectory of American history in the last 50 years, you see an upward progression in the rights of women and African Americans and gay Americans, and you see a decline in labor and an associated increase in economic inequality. So you have this scissors, and it seems to me that getting labor to be part of that upward trajectory by connecting it to civil rights could be important. Now, people in labor circles I know get very nervous when one talks about individual rights, because we are here because we believe in collective action. And I just want to emphasize that the whole reason to have civil rights for workers would be to promote that collective, those collective goals. And that's certainly been true of the civil rights movement. The fact that an individual can sue under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act to protect her rights in no way means that individuals can't also come together in marches in Ferguson or for Trayvon Martin or others. So the two are not mutually exclusive. The one can reinforce the other. In July, legislation was introduced by Congressman Keith Ellison and John Lewis to support this idea of making labor organizing a civil right. It's called the Employee Empowerment Act, and I was pleased that a number of civil rights groups and labor organizations have endorsed that legislation. It is unlikely to be high on the agenda of John Boehner, and I recognize that, which is why Moshe and I are now working with some state and local officials, an idea that Harold Meyerson has talked about in California in particular, because it is possible in certain blue states to make some progress, and even some municipalities have, many municipalities have civil rights legislation that you could add labor organizing to. There's a technical problem here. The National Labor Relations Act preempts state and local efforts for covered employees, but there are 25 million non-covered employees for whom we could start to build a movement around labor organizing as a civil right. The idea here is to try to build some action at the state and local level so that when the stars are aligned once again and there's a Democratic majority in the House and the Senate and Democratic president, we'll be in a position to do something better. And I think that this could be something more broadly that would excite young people who missed the civil rights movement and want to be about something bigger than themselves. And so if this could be an idea around which young people said, we want to be part of a civil rights movement that will help bring back the American middle class, then I think we'll have done something important. Thanks.